The world is in chaos, and across all continents, countries are facing serious challenges that could push them to the brink. Even European countries like Belarus and Ukraine might not escape collapse. Imagine places where governments struggle to maintain control while economies crumble, with inflation reaching 400%, public debt skyrocketing to billions of dollars, and people facing hunger, forced to migrate. Let's explore 16 countries that might collapse in 2024 or 2025, including once powerful nations like Argentina and Venezuela. Number 16, Sudan. Sudan is currently embroiled in a year-long conflict, with aid agencies warning that the country is on the brink of collapse, facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis largely overlooked by the world. Islamic Relief, a humanitarian and development agency, painted a grim picture, warning that Sudan is on the verge of mass famine, with young children facing starvation. According to Doctors Without Borders, the situation is dire, with over 8.4 million people, including 2 million children under 5, displaced by the conflict. Despite these alarming figures, the international response remains indifferent, with only 5% of the 2024 humanitarian response plan for Sudan funded so far. El Sadiq Noah, the agency's country director in Sudan, stated, "In the past year I've seen my country descend into violence, madness and destruction, abandoned by the rest of the world." The conflict, pitting Sudan's armed forces against the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, has displaced millions, with countless civilians killed or injured. Since the civil war began, thousands of homes, schools, hospitals, and vital civilian infrastructure have been destroyed, plunging the nation into a severe humanitarian crisis and creating the world's largest displacement crisis. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, warned that Sudan might experience a crisis worse than the 1980s famine that claimed 1.2 million lives in Ethiopia. UN agencies have repeatedly warned that Sudan's humanitarian situation and potential famine could lead to the country's collapse. What do you think about this situation? Share your thoughts. Number 15, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has previously declared bankruptcy, threatening the nation's stability with a massive debt of about $51 billion by 2024. Most of this debt is owed to international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank, as well as countries like China and India. This has pushed Sri Lanka's debt-to-GDP ratio to over 100%, raising concerns about its ability to meet financial commitments. The crisis worsened as the Sri Lankan rupee devalued sharply, dropping nearly 30% against the US dollar in 2022. This devaluation led to soaring inflation and higher import costs, pushing up prices of essentials like food, fuel, and medicine. Although inflation stabilized in 2023 after exceeding 70%, the cost of living remains exceptionally high. Political instability has further complicated the situation, with economic hardships fueling widespread public discontent. Nearly 30% of the population lives below the poverty line, especially in rural areas, and the gap between rich and poor continues to widen. Social tensions have impacted essential services like healthcare and education, with hospitals struggling to maintain necessary supplies, while schools lack resources. With 22 million people, Sri Lanka is currently struggling to emerge from a severe financial crisis due to a foreign exchange crisis in 2024. Facing the biggest financial crisis in its history, Sri Lanka is almost out of fuel, forcing the government to halt non-essential public services to conserve fuel. The nation may negotiate with creditors to request a debt freeze until it stabilizes. What do you think about Sri Lanka's severe crisis? Share your thoughts. Number 14, Venezuela. Venezuela, once a symbol of prosperity in Latin America due to its vast oil reserves, is now facing a prolonged economic and political crisis lasting over a decade. The country has sunk into chaos, with hyperinflation beginning in 2016 and expected to average 200% by 2024. The government chose to print money to cover costs, worsening the situation by devaluing the currency and reducing citizens' purchasing power. International sanctions, particularly from the US, have crippled Venezuela by restricting oil exports and access to global markets. The country has witnessed large protests, most notably in 2014 and 2017, often met with severe repression from Nicolas Maduro's regime, which maintains power through the imprisonment and exile of opposition leaders and the suppression of dissent. Venezuela's prolonged economic decline is due to poor management, corruption, and dangerous dependence on oil exports. Millions have been plunged into a humanitarian crisis, with essentials like food and medicine becoming scarce. From 2012 to 2022, average inflation soared above 9,000%, compared to just 88.4% in Latin America. The 2024 economic forecast shows a 35% decline, with the labor force shrinking as about 7 million people have migrated. The poverty rate is expected to rise, with 60% of the population facing poverty. Number 13, Belarus. Belarus is trapped in a web of political, economic, and social challenges threatening the future of the nation. European Union sanctions, imposed in response to Belarus's support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have caused severe economic strain. These measures were meant to change Belarus's stance but have instead led to massive losses. Financial restrictions have cut off access to essential foreign capital, isolating the country from the global financial system by being removed from SWIFT, while trade disruptions due to import bans have raised living costs. Belarus's involvement in the Ukraine conflict goes beyond support and includes crucial meetings between Russia and Ukraine, as well as allowing Russian troops to be stationed on its territory. Despite rumors of Belarusian military involvement, there's no official confirmation. These challenges weigh heavily on Belarus's economy and geopolitics, and the full impact of the sanctions is still unclear. Further military involvement could worsen the situation, plunging Belarus into unrest. Public dissatisfaction with the government has grown due to its failure to provide basic services. Infrastructure, including transport, healthcare, and housing, is deteriorating due to a lack of investment and modernization, hindering economic growth and worsening conditions, thereby fueling unrest. Poor infrastructure also deters foreign investment, limiting economic opportunities. Human rights violations such as arbitrary detention, torture, and censorship have created fear and distrust. Repression of activists and journalists has stifled dialogue and reform, deepening societal divisions, leaving many citizens disillusioned and detached from politics. Belarus's political situation is further affected by the absence of a genuine democratic process. The 2020 presidential election, deemed fraudulent, led to mass protests, but the government responded with brutal repression, creating an atmosphere of fear. The international community has strongly condemned these actions, but Belarus's government continues its political repression. Consequently, the brain drain is worsening, as many young, educated individuals leave the country for better opportunities abroad. This exodus further weakens Belarus's prospects for economic recovery and development. Number 12, Lebanon. Lebanon faces serious challenges threatening its survival in 2024. Since 2019, Lebanon has suffered severe economic instability, with the Lebanese pound losing over 98% of its value against the US dollar, resulting in hyperinflation. Prices of basic goods have skyrocketed, making daily life unbearably expensive. A family of 4 now needs over $11,000 monthly, while the average wage is much lower. The World Bank predicts food inflation will exceed 500% in 2022, causing widespread hunger and malnutrition. The banking system has collapsed, preventing citizens from accessing their savings, leading to increased poverty. Power sharing among sects has created political dysfunction, while corruption hampers economic recovery and fuels protests demanding better living conditions. However, the government has yet to respond effectively. Lebanon's healthcare system is on the verge of collapse, with hospitals lacking supplies and personnel as many medical staff have migrated. The water sector is also struggling, with outdated infrastructure leading to losses and pollution, reducing access to clean water. Lebanon's geopolitical position complicates matters, with regional tensions and the highest refugee population per capita in the world straining resources and infrastructure. Lebanon stands at a critical crossroads, facing immense challenges that must be urgently addressed. The crisis highlights the need for international support and cooperation, or Lebanon could face complete disintegration. Number 11, Argentina. Did you know that Argentina is the largest debtor to the International Monetary Fund? The country holds a world record for sovereign defaults, and it seems the count may rise further. The Argentine peso is currently trading at a discount of nearly 50% on the black market. Foreign reserves are extremely low, and bonds are trading at just 20 cents on the dollar, less than half the value after the country's debt restructuring in 2020. The public debt has reached record levels, putting the nation in a very complex situation. The total government debt of Argentina has risen to $378.518 billion, an all-time high. Regarding the credit that Argentina received in 2018, it was extended in March with $45 billion over a few years. Currently, the country's debt is a topic of debate in economic and political fields. According to data from the Argentine Statistics Agency, annual inflation in the country reached 21.4% in February 2024, indicating the severity of the economic crisis faced by the South American nation and the new president, Javier Milei. Experts have warned that 2025 might be a challenging year, with rising prices and Argentina's debt model being extremely risky, as they have to pay increasingly more interest. For every $10, $3 go toward interest payments, making it a tough year for Argentina's economy with heavy inflation and debt service pressures. This significant strain on the country's financial economy could be the cause of a potential collapse. Number 10. Ecuador. Ecuador is experiencing a new crisis with violent protests and attempts to overthrow President Guillermo Lasso. The protests have led to shortages of food and medicine, as well as a sharp drop in oil production. In an attempt to quell social unrest, the government announced measures such as reducing fuel prices, canceling debts, and subsidizing fertilizers, but these were not enough. In the context of the crisis, oil production fell by 1.8 million barrels due to blockades preventing the transportation of supplies to oil fields, leading to losses of $166.46 million. Complicated by Ecuador's high government debt, forecasts estimate the public sector's financial deficit will rise to 2.4% of GDP. The country has experienced more than a decade of consecutive financial deficits. 2008 was the last year with a surplus, while the worst historical deficits were recorded in 2014 and 2020, exceeding $6 billion. The 2022 deficit stood at $2.3 billion. Currently, Ecuador's economy relies on tax revenues and oil, but tax income is insufficient to cover current expenses, mainly salaries and wages. The government plans to issue bonds abroad again, incurring an additional debt of up to $74.3 billion by 2022, of which $46.455 billion corresponds to foreign debt. Number 9. Ethiopia. Ethiopia continues to face the severe consequences of a prolonged civil war, which has significantly impacted the country's economic development. The conflict has caused extensive destruction of infrastructure, massive loss of lives, and the displacement of millions of people. These factors have exacerbated the humanitarian crisis, leading to famine and severe food insecurity nationwide. As of the end of September, Ethiopia faces an external public debt of nearly $18 billion, equivalent to approximately $570 per person. This financial burden has forced the government to seek debt relief and budget support, although the Ministry of Finance has yet to announce details regarding debt restructuring plans. The armed conflict has caused immense human suffering, with thousands of deaths, widespread displacement, and millions facing hunger. The ongoing instability continues to strain the economy, hindering efforts to address urgent social challenges. Ethiopia is seeking relief through the Group of 20 framework, with options for debt restructuring to support economic recovery. The country is also vulnerable to climate change, with rising temperatures and erratic rainfall negatively affecting agriculture, the backbone of Ethiopia's economy. Frequent droughts and floods have reduced food production, increasing poverty, especially in rural areas. Another major concern is the management of the Nile River, a crucial water source for Ethiopia and its neighbors. The construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has raised tensions with Egypt and Sudan, sparking fears over regional stability. Number 8. Ghana. Ghana is currently facing a severe economic crisis, as evidenced by an urgent need for foreign borrowing. The value of the Ghanaian CDI has plummeted, losing over 55% against the US dollar from January to October 2022 and continuing to decline by an additional 10% in the first 4 months of 2024. High inflation is worsening the situation, with interest rates reaching 30% in 2022 and remaining high at 23.5% as of February 2024, threatening the country's financial stability. Public debt in Ghana is at alarming levels. Despite participating in the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries (HIPC) initiative, the debt has increased by $7 billion annually since 2000, totaling $54 billion, which accounts for 78% of GDP. Projections indicate that public debt will exceed 80% of GDP by 2023, limiting the government's ability to invest in essential infrastructure and services and slowing economic growth. In addition, political instability is on the rise, with increasing tensions between the ruling party and the opposition as the 2024 election approaches. The risk of conflict and instability threatens national stability, while corruption exacerbates these issues. Ghana ranked 72nd in the Corruption Perception Index by Transparency International in 2023. The country's reliance on foreign funding also makes it vulnerable to economic shocks, leading to social unrest, as seen in recent protests. Environmental issues such as deforestation and land degradation, especially in rural areas reliant on agriculture, are also on the rise. Ghana's economy struggles due to a lack of diversification, relying heavily on cocoa and gold exports, making it susceptible to global commodity price fluctuations. Efforts to diversify the economy have been slow, and the manufacturing sector remains underdeveloped, limiting job creation and economic resilience. The education system, although improved, still faces challenges in providing quality training. Number 7. Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine has been very complex in recent years. The ongoing invasion by Russia is the reason why it is almost certain that they will have to restructure their debt. Major investors like Morgan Stanley and Amundi have warned that Russia's invasion means Ukraine will almost certainly have to restructure its debt of over $20 billion. As of 2023, the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance reported that the country's total national debt is at its highest ever, nearing $133 billion. Additionally, a crisis may arise as a $1.2 billion bond payment comes due. The state gas company of Ukraine, Naftogaz, has requested international creditors to postpone debt payments for 2 years, and it is believed that the Ukrainian government may make similar requests regarding its other debts. Because of the invasion, the country also needs to invest over $100 billion to rebuild all infrastructure damaged by bombing and armed conflict. Some experts agree that the best strategy the Ukrainian government can implement is to temporarily halt bond payments through an agreement. It is estimated that Ukraine's economy will shrink by 35%, and its economic activity will be stunted, marked by crop losses and a reduced workforce, as 7 million people become refugees and another 7 million are internally displaced due to the war. Even in February 2024, Ukraine admitted that its military is facing a very difficult situation along the front line with Russia due to stalled aid. On the other hand, poverty in the country is expected to increase, and it is believed that the percentage of the population living below the poverty line could reach 60%. Number 6. Pakistan. Pakistan is at a critical moment with stability hanging by a thread. The economic crisis is severe, with foreign exchange reserves alarmingly low, only sufficient for 5 weeks of imports as of September 2023. The precarious financial situation has led to a sharp depreciation of the Pakistani rupee, creating instability for the economy, as about 40% of government revenue is used to pay off debts, with total external debt reaching $20.8 billion despite support from the IMF. Political instability and polarization continue to increase, especially with elections approaching. The depreciation of the currency has caused inflation to skyrocket, expected to reach around 27% by 2024, severely affecting purchasing power and driving up living costs. This situation has exacerbated poverty and fueled social unrest as the middle and lower classes struggle to survive. The government is facing the difficult task of reducing debt, increasing revenue and responding to natural disasters like floods. While there are signs of economic growth, nearly 40% of Pakistan's population still lives below the poverty line. According to World Bank reports, income inequality is severe, with wealth concentrated in the hands of a few. The education system is also in crisis, with about 23 million children lacking access to education services. Meanwhile, healthcare is under pressure due to poor infrastructure and a lack of personnel. Poor health conditions and low human development indicators are clear consequences. Ethnic and sectarian tensions continue to threaten Pakistan's unity, with conflicts between Sunni and Shia Muslims highlighting deep divides. Dependency on agriculture also makes the country vulnerable to climate change, with frequent floods and droughts disrupting production, leading to food shortages and economic instability. Facing security, economic and political challenges, Pakistan is very fragile and stands at an uncertain future. What are your thoughts on the political situation here? Please leave a comment. Number 5. Kenya. Kenya is facing significant political instability, especially during election periods. This situation is driven by deep-seated corruption, ethnic tensions, and widespread distrust in government institutions. The 2022 election, although relatively peaceful, left many unresolved issues. With over 40 ethnic groups often aligning along ethnic lines, conditions for conflict are created. This was clearly demonstrated in the post-election chaos from 2007 to 2008, which resulted in over 1,100 deaths and thousands of displacements. Corruption has deeply infiltrated Kenya's political system, affecting all areas, from government contracts to public services. According to Transparency International, in 2023, Kenya ranked 126 out of 180 countries in the Corruption Perceptions Index, reflecting the severity of the problem. Economically, Kenya also faces many challenges, including rising public debt. By 2022, the debt-to-GDP ratio had reached 73%, with about 30% of government revenue allocated to debt repayment, limiting the budget for essential development. Furthermore, the severe food crisis has worsened due to drought, inflation, natural disasters, and internal conflict, leading to livestock deaths, crop failures, and widespread malnutrition. Although the government's Vision 2030 plan has improved living standards, security concerns are increasing as the country faces threats from both internal and external sources. One notable threat is terrorism from the Al-Shabaab group based in Somalia, with brutal attacks such as the 2013 Westgate Mall attack and the 2015 university attack causing numerous casualties and spreading fear throughout the country. Number 4. Egypt. Egypt has a debt-to-GDP ratio of nearly 95% and has witnessed one of the largest outflows of international cash this year, around $1 billion. The fund company FIM Partners estimates that Egypt has $100 billion in foreign currency debt to be repaid over the next 5 years, including a $3.3 billion bond maturing in 2024, indicating that a collapse next year may be foreseeable. In addition to its high debt, Egypt faces other issues such as inflation and a scarcity of foreign currency liquidity. A series of blows in recent years, particularly the severe impact from Russia's invasion of Ukraine since March 2022, has caused the Egyptian pound to lose 1/4 of its value, with inflation reaching 15%, while product prices continue to rise daily. The country is in a difficult position as it imports 80% of its wheat from Russia and Ukraine, prompting the government to implement drastic measures to somewhat curb inflation, such as banning imports of various products. As part of the country's post-crisis recovery plan, the government has also created an incentive package aimed at increasing private sector contributions to the economy to 65% and attracting foreign investors. What do you think about the economic situation in this country? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Number 3. Tunisia. Tunisia is currently facing a serious economic crisis. The country's budget deficit is nearing 10%, exacerbated by a large public sector and wage expenditures. The economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, combined with the conflict in Ukraine, have further intensified these difficulties, pushing Tunisia to the brink of financial collapse. With external accounts unlikely to improve, the economic outlook remains bleak. Average GDP growth was only 1.2% from 2016 to 2021, insufficient to meet the population's needs. Unemployment, particularly among youth and graduates, remains a significant issue. By 2023, the unemployment rate reached 15.11%, with youth unemployment exceeding 37.48%. Public trust in government institutions has diminished. Tunisia's reliance on imports for essential goods has made it vulnerable to fluctuations in global markets. The war in Ukraine has disrupted supply chains, leading to soaring prices for wheat, fuel, and fertilizers, adding pressure to the national budget and threatening food security. Many Tunisians are struggling to afford basic needs, and the government has had to heavily subsidize bread and other essential items to maintain social stability. However, this has also contributed to rising public debt. Number 2. Nigeria. Living in Nigeria means facing frequent power outages, a harsh reality that became apparent in 2024 when 6 major power grid failures plunged millions into darkness. This crisis highlights a crucial issue. Unreliable electricity infrastructure is stifling economic growth. With nearly 30% of government revenue allocated to debt repayment, Nigeria struggles to invest in essential social and infrastructure programs. Despite its rich oil resources, severe income inequality means many citizens do not benefit from this industry. A shift towards clean energy and the removal of fuel subsidies could worsen living conditions for vulnerable populations. Poor management, oil theft, and disruptions at refineries further deplete national revenue, leading to a paralyzed economy. Nigeria is also experiencing a brain drain, with many skilled professionals leaving the country for better opportunities abroad, depriving the nation of essential talent needed for development. It is projected that the debt-to-GDP ratio will sharply increase, reaching about 46.6% by 2024 and 46.8% by 2025, meaning nearly half of Nigeria's economic output will be consumed by debt. What are your thoughts on the potential collapse of this nation? Please share your opinions. Number 1. Haiti. Haiti is facing political instability and increasing gang violence following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Armed gangs frequently control distribution routes, causing shortages of essential goods and fuel. High prices make it increasingly difficult for people to afford available food. Meanwhile, climate shocks and the first cholera outbreak in 3 years have strained critical health and sanitation systems. The situation worsened after a criminal gang attacked the national prison on March 3rd, freeing nearly 3,600 prisoners. The number of escapes in Haiti now stands at around 4,500. Escalating street violence has restricted people's movements and access to essential services. Armed gangs now control about 80% of Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince. Haiti is currently the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. More than half the population lives below the poverty line, with limited access to basic services, and many rely on subsistence agriculture to feed their families. The country also heavily relies on external revenue. From 2010 to 2020, the United Nations allocated over $1.13 billion in international aid to Haiti, most of which funded disaster relief missions and development programs. Meanwhile, remittances to Haiti have steadily increased over the past 2 decades, totaling $4.5 billion in 2022, equivalent to 22% of Haiti's GDP. As the island remains paralyzed by multiple crises, what are your thoughts on the situation in this country? Please share your opinion. So, we have explored the 16 most vulnerable countries at risk of collapse in 2024 and 2025. Which country do you think is most likely to collapse? Please remember to comment your thoughts. Thank you for watching our video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates from us. See you in the next videos.